Hello again and good morning. From Metro Manila, the Philippines, Southeastern Asia, I'm going to film two short videos, once again dealing with the upcoming Canadian federal election, although it is still some 1 year and 3 months away because it must be held by October 2019. Those Canadians who plan to vote or are determined to vote for the main opposition party, the Conservatives, have of course a perfect right to do so. But those of them who expect miracles, who expect quick fixes to Canada's complicated social, economic, political, cultural, demographic, let alone moral and spiritual problems, should manage their expectations. While there are probably many well-intentioned individuals inside the Canadian Conservative Party, including those who should become cabinet ministers or then parliamentary secretaries or chairpersons of parliamentary committees should the Conservatives form the next government in 2019. They themselves are divided on some of these issues. Or if we take the abortion issue, for example, while there are several prominent pro-lifers, even in the current caucus or parliamentary group of the Conservatives in the Federal House of Commons, including Rachel Harder, there are also those Conservatives who believe that at least under some circumstances abortion should be allowed, and then there are those Conservatives who are on these moral matters liberals, small L liberals. In other words, they believe in a woman's right to choose abortion. So do not expect a Conservative government under a possible future Prime Minister Andrew Scheer to introduce a legislation either restricting abortion to medical emergencies, which would be a great thing, let alone trying to abolish the abortion right or practice altogether. Already because any such law would be automatically, immediately challenged by pro-abortion groups in courts, leading all the way up to the Supreme Court of Canada, and so many Canadian judges are socially liberal that it is unlikely for the abortion laws to be overturned, so that abortions at least would be restricted to the medical emergencies where there is a proven danger to the pregnant girl's or woman's health or life. But short of a powerful Christian revival that would sweep all across Canada, would result in the Christian conversions of at least hundreds of thousands, if not even millions of Canadians, including thousands of politicians, civil servants, including judges, social activists, even abortionists, then it is unlikely for the abortion law at least to become more restrictive. Then another issue, of course, is the same-sex marriage. While there are many Conservatives who in principle oppose same-sex marriage, do not expect a possible future Prime Minister Andrew Scheer to divide his federal cabinet and caucus on this issue, because there are, once again, on this issue as well, a significant number of Conservatives who either do not care or believe that under the general label of human rights or labels of human rights and civil rights, same-sex couples who are committed to each other have a right to marry. Even former Prime Minister Stephen Harper favored civil unions or civil partnerships, or so-called registered partnerships for the same-sex couples, although he opposed and hopefully still continues to oppose marriages for them. What about taxes? Well, chances are that should the Conservatives form a clear majority government with at least a 20 to 30 seat majority, let alone more, in the Canadian House of Commons after the October 2019 federal parliamentary elections, that they will introduce laws cutting taxes, at least selectively. Do not expect, however, huge across-the-board tax cuts like 10% or even 5%. Because, of course, those tax cuts have to be financed either by reducing the rate of spending increase or even cutting the absolute spending rates for certain programs, and or increasing gradually some other taxes and or tax-related fees. So if, for example, the next Conservative government scraps the controversial federal carbon tax, do not expect it to give Canadians a totally free ride, an unconditional tax cut. But expect the government to gradually phase in some tax increases and or fee increases that will cover at least a part of that lost revenue. And since the Canadian federal government operates on a deficit budget, although it is a much more modest and manageable deficit than that of the US federal government, while there may be short-term stimulus in the form of tax cuts and spending, targeted tax cuts and targeted spending increases, especially should the Conservatives, assuming that they will win next year's federal election, should the Conservatives be re-elected in 2023, they may well adopt more restrictive monetary policies. Because eventually, of course, those deficits have to be in some way paid for. I don't think that the Canadian government, should it be a conservative, the Canadian federal government, should it be a conservative one or a liberal one, would dare to approach the International Monetary Fund for a loan, and would dare to ask, let alone demand, that some of its debts be forgiven or cancelled. That is what various third world countries, especially several African countries, have asked for and have received. Or then, as a gesture of economic mercy, the IMF has forgiven those countries that struggle to provide even basic services to their people. And then, as far as the ethics of cabinet ministers and members of parliament in general, it seems that certain conservative members of parliament, such as Rachel Harder, delight in either accusing the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau or certain other Liberal cabinet ministers of ethical misdeeds, or delight in asking those questions during the question period. Did the Prime Minister, especially the Prime Minister, seems to be the target of such questions and accusations, seriously consider the ethical implications of this and this holiday abroad, for example? But is the overall ethical level of cabinet ministers and members of parliament, especially members of the House of Commons, going to significantly improve just because the party label of the governing party may change? Not automatically, because the sinful human nature is just as present in the lives and actions of conservatives as it is in those of liberals or New Democrats and so forth. Of course, I would personally hope that should Andrew Scheer lead the the Conservatives, they are no longer called Progressive Conservatives at the federal level, should he lead them to a strong majority government, that overall Canada would become, at least during their first and especially second term, or possible, though unlikely, third term, a better country, yes. But we should not expect overnight changes for the better. And they will have to have some kind of plan to at least slow down the rate of pollution. While we of course can disagree over the causes of climate change, and while climate change definitely does not mean constant global warming. In fact, in a number of countries there have been exceptionally cold months or even seasons during this century. Nevertheless, the climate is changing, and the environment unfortunately is getting polluted. So the Conservatives may condemn the current Liberal federal government for not estimating even the cost of the federal carbon tax to an average Canadian family. However, they then define average. They will have to face those issues themselves while they're in office. And do not expect that blame game to end. It is still fashionable for certain Liberal cabinet ministers, such as the Environment and Climate Change Minister Catherine McKenna, occasionally to blame the previous federal cabinets, the Harper Conservatives. But 2 or 3 years down the line, we may have Conservative cabinet ministers who will blame the Trudeau Liberals for lingering problems. It takes, of course, a lot of courage and humility to admit personal responsibility, to admit that one has not performed as well as one should have, or one's government has not performed as well as one's government should have on a number of issues. But then again, for certain politicians, apparently this would be political suicide. This would amount basically to a resignation statement, or at least to a statement conceding the next federal parliamentary elections victory to the main opposition party. So these are some of the things that we should keep in mind as we approach the next Canadian federal election. Have a nice and blessed remainder of the summer.